Welcome to today's video where I'm going to be demonstrating the removal of these eyebrows here. So this client has had several sessions in the past of many different types of pigments and started off with microblading. So there's clearly a lot of carbon in there. As you can see, the strokes have all merged together. While we're removing, we're going to be using circle movements, but not like this. As you can see, there's loads of gaps between each circle, so we're going to leave loads untreated if that's how we move. So this is going to be how we're going to be moving our needle, with circles that overlap at each edge so that we're going to get a nice solid coverage. Please feel free to leave any comments or questions down below, and we're going to get straight on with it. So this client had already been numbed for about 20 minutes before this procedure, and you can see me now starting on the tail. So I'm using a 5RS needle. I would always use a shader needle for any kind of removal. They're nice and wide, so they cover a large area, especially with me using a 5, but you can use something bigger than a 5 as well. So you can see that I'm using those circular motions there. Now the removal substance that I'm using is Aloor, so that's by Deluxe Brows, and this is an alkaline removal. So it's slightly different than saline. I'd say it's more effective than saline, but this one by Aloor is actually gentle as well. But it is really effective, and you are going to be able to see while I'm working that it does lighten it as I'm working. This is another form of chemical removal, so there are acids, alkalines and saline, as I mentioned. And what they do is it works through osmosis. So we're going to tattoo that substance into the previous PMU, and that goes into the skin and it bonds with the pigment through osmosis. And because the substance is alkaline, or the same if you're using acid or saline, the skin doesn't like it. So your body wants to reject that substance. It's intolerant to it. So then the substance, whether it's alkaline, saline or acid, will bond with the pigment and be pushed out by the body rejecting it. So by its very nature, no removal is particularly nice, because it will always be a little bit on the sore side because your body is pushing that substance out. So you can see I'm making these nice tight circles, making sure that I cover absolutely every bit of the brow. We need to work really consistently, and actually, because we're using a shader, you can put a little bit more pressure on to make sure that the removal substance does go into the skin. So as you can see from looking at that, no removal is nice. There's far more blood and lymph than you would get if you were tattooing pigment in, and that's generally down to the fact that the removal substance that you're using is going to irritate the skin and it is going to make it bleed. This isn't anything to worry about, because this is part of the removal really, and this means that the preparation for removal can be a little bit more lenient than the preparation for permanent makeup. So if a client was coming to get their brows done, to have pigment put into their brows, then the preparation would always stipulate that you can't have any kind of blood thinner. So things like ibuprofen, caffeine on the day is not a good idea. Alcohol on the day or before is going to make you bleed. Now, I'm not suggesting that for removal clients that they drink 10 pints of coffee and drink a bottle of wine the day before, because that still may lead to problems with healing. But things aren't as big a deal, because if you think about it, when you're putting pigment into the skin, what we don't want is our client to bleed, because if they bleed, they're going to push all that pigment out and you're going to get poor results. Whereas with this, if they bleed, it's going to push the pigment out, which is actually what we're trying to achieve. So please don't take that as telling your client that they can have really strong coffees and drink and take ibuprofen beforehand. But what I'm suggesting is it isn't as much of a contraindication. So if someone had a coffee that morning, I would still absolutely feel free to treat them. So you can see that there is a bit more bleeding with this than you would get just working on the skin. You can see it on the gauze there as well. With removal, I'll generally do 2 full passes. So I'm going to show you pretty much a full pass of removal here. So just working into the skin consistently in all those little circles, making sure that I cover absolutely every bit. I will always go a little bit outside the outline of the brow as well. So I'll go over the outline and then just slightly extend that area as well, because with removal, what you can get if you don't go right over that line is you can just end up removing the inner section of the eyebrow and leaving a bit of an outline. So I'm going to make sure that I cover that as well. And I've got a good stretch between my fingers there, so the skin is really tightly stretched, because you can find with these bigger needles that they can snag on the skin a little bit, so your stretch does have to be really good so that you can push that removal substance into the skin there. As I work towards the front of the brows as well, just like with the top and bottom edges, I'm going to want to go slightly over the front of the brow there, just to make sure that I get everything out. And it's the front of these brows that's got those really blurry hair strokes where it's all just merged into one, and it is a bit of a mess there. But if you watch carefully, you can see that this substance, Aloor, it does actually frost the brow and makes it look a lot lighter. As your client is healing though, the pigment can look a lot darker. So if you look at that now, it's already lightened. If you compare it to the other brow, it already looks lighter. So your client can be quite happy when they leave because they will look substantially lighter. Now we're going to do a close-up of the second pass. So this brow is already looking a little lighter, well, quite a lot lighter from the first pass. So we're going to just go over that again. I'm probably not going to be quite as thorough as with my my first pass. And you can see that it does bring quite a lot of blood to the surface. It doesn't look pleasant when you're removing brows with chemical removal. There's always more blood than there would be if you were doing it, if you're actually putting the pigment in. So you can see it does look a little bit uncomfortable. Between passes, if you want, you can use secondary numbing. There is an issue with that though, is that a lot of secondary numbing has epinephrine in, which is basically adrenaline, which is a vasoconstrictor, so it actually stops the blood flow. This is why artists love it, for making the pigment really stand out so they can see where they've been working, and you get that blanched skin look. The problem with this, in this case, is that we want the blood to be pushing the pigment out. That's part of the removal. So if we actually constrict the blood flow, we're making it a little bit more difficult. It does you no harm to just sit and let the body push out with lymph and a little bit of blood between the passes. So if your client is struggling with the pain, and as I said, it can be quite uncomfortable, then you can use some secondary numbing. But if they're well numbed from the numbing cream beforehand, from the primary, then if they can handle it, I'd say just leave the secondary numbing out. With any kind of removal, the aftercare is crucial as well. It's almost as important as what we're doing right now. So your client needs to keep these really nice and dry and allow a crust to form, and that is going to take a load of the pigment with it. So no creams or anything for the first week, and just leave that scab alone. You should join my free Facebook group if you've got any questions as well, or if you want any advice. This has been chemical removal, and if you want to know all the different types of removal, then you need this video here.